Welcome to a new episode of Retracing History here on Redoubt Productions. And, well, we're going to talk about something that doesn't usually go hand in hand with historians, that being sports ball. I'm going to talk about sports ball. In particular, we're going to be talking about what some consider to be the first professional football game ever held. We're in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which for many years had the claim to be in the home of professional football. And then that got disputed. But it was kind of right, but not necessarily the way you think. Yeah, it's a very controversial subject matter, the origins of professional American football. So I've come out here to a obscure part of Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and we're gonna try to break down really what really happened on these grounds over a century ago. So I'm not gonna lie, it is very busy and noisy here on Ligonier Street. So instead of me trying to do this whole story with all the cars going past and interrupting me, and also it is like supposed to get 9 degrees today. I am already sweating. Let's turn it over to do some studio talking throughout this episode. It's so nice. We're in a cold, aired environment, and it's actually a week later after I was filming on location. Believe it or not, the temperatures in southwestern Pennsylvania went down to the 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I am loving this. I even got the window open, which does mean you might hear some background noise, and I greatly apologize. I just want to enjoy not having to have the fans on or the AC. We're going to pay for this dearly, aren't we? Yes. So let's wind the clocks back to 1895, and let's talk a bit about what is American football in 1895. American football is really only a quarter of a century old at this point, and it's still really an amalgamation of rules from rugby and soccer. And it's predominantly played by colleges. And these games were gnarly. You ain't gonna see any forward passes, and that was actually illegal at this point. The only pass you'll see are close distance tosses over to somebody on either end of the line of scrimmage or behind you. It's all about running the ball into a defensive wall and very little protection. People actually died in games at this point. It was not uncommon to hear about a death that happened on the football field. And we call gridiron football sometimes because at this point in time, literally it was a grid. It wasn't just the yard lines. They had squares over the entire playing field to better determine where they would lay the line of scrimmage. It was really difficult to get amateur teams to stay around full time beyond the college level because of how brutal the game was and also how controversial game decisions were. I mean, you'll hear a lot of stories about heavy betting going on behind the scenes, and people would always get into fights if their team didn't win, be it players fighting on the field or crowds in the stands causing riots. So no sooner did you get a small league going in like part of a state, it usually would dissolve at most after a few years. And that really sets the scene in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, when the local YMCA decides they want to organize their own football club. And they want these guys to play a regular season. Please don't kill yourselves in the first game. Please don't get into a bar fight in the mud. Please actually play some nice, healthy, athletic games. So they're going to get some heavy hitters for 1895 football together to manage this new football club. Going down from Russell Aukerman, who had been a halfback at Gettysburg College. They're going to bring in Henry Ryan, who had been a tackle for the West Virginia University's football team. And they're also going to bring in David J. Barry to be the manager of this new club. Mr. Barry had been the editor for the local newspaper, the Latrobe Clipper. He's a young man, 25 years old, and he's very ambitious, and he is really clever at coming up with new ideas. Granted, as you're gonna see, not all those ideas work out, but he is the idea man. So Barry is gonna spend most of the summer of 1895 organizing a roster together that's willing to stay around for 12 games and give a proper season going. They're going to do a lot of their practices in a empty lot along the Pennsylvania Railroad tracks, roughly where Alexandria and Depot Streets cross in Latrobe, Pennsylvania today. And September 3rd, 1895 is slated to be their first game of their first season. They're going to be playing against a football club from Jeannette, Pennsylvania, not too far to the west of Latrobe. What's interesting is both of these towns are industrial towns. They're both built on the Pennsylvania Railroad. Their big difference, Jeannette's a glass town, Latrobe is a railroad and steel town. So you got the steelworks fighting the glassworks. Thankfully, we're not actually having them wielding what products they're making. Can you imagine if you had the Latrobe Athletics run around with steel bars, bashing these Jeannette players with glass bottles? That would have been horrifying. The problem is, just about a few days out before this game's about to be played, the quarterback for the Latrobe Athletics informs Mr. Barry that he has a conflict of schedule. He has to go play a baseball game. He can't play this first game, which kind of undoes this whole idea of they're going to have a regular team together for a whole schedule. So Mr. Barry is freaking out, where am I going to get our quarterback? And he ends up hearing about a young quarterback playing up in Indiana, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour train ride away from Latrobe. And that is John Brallier, which, by the way, I'm going to mispronounce that as Brallier later on in the video. It's John Brallier, I believe, from using Google pronunciation and people to have similar names. Maybe I'm completely wrong calling it Brallier. You can correct me in the comments section. I'm sure Editor Chan will be very happy by that. John Brallier had played as quarterback for Indiana Normal School. However, he actually wasn't going to attend college there. Instead, he was getting ready to prepare to attend college at Washington and Jefferson University. And W&JU were really eager to have Brallier. By all accounts, many consider him one of the greatest football players to never go into the Hall of Fame. They had actually offered to cover all of his expenses for 1 year of classes if he would come and play football for them. Brallier hasn't made, especially this is in the days before you're going to have standardized sports scholarships. He hasn't made. And when he gets the call from Mr. Barry, well, he's interested, but he doesn't want to risk injuring himself in these gnarly, non-college games that are happening in these Rust Belt communities. Why would he risk his college career going for playing a game in little old Latrobe? Mr. Barry is going to incentivize the deal, and he is going to offer Brallier $10 to play the September 3rd game, plus covering travel expenses. Brallier, taking all the money he can have for his career. He's actually studying to be a dentist, believe it or not. So he's going to take that offer of Mr. Barry. He's going to ride by train down to Latrobe on the night of September 2nd. And he gets one practice with the Latrobe Athletics. Not a lot of training. He gets 1 day to get accustomed to his new teammates. The next day, he's going to be playing against Jeannette. And by paying Brallier $10, Mr. Barry and many people would claim that this was the first time somebody had been paid, somebody that was going to go pro in playing American football. Again, we'll talk more about that later. So in preparation for this video, I actually reached out to the Latrobe Historical Society to kind of ask them, where was this YMCA field that the first pro football game was played upon? And they ultimately gave me a copy of a lithograph, a bird's eye view lithograph map around 1900, pointed to an area, an open field that was near the Latrobe Steelworks, and told me that was where the first games were played. That would today be a residential block defined by Ligonier and Gertrude Streets near the old Latrobe Steelworks and the local American Legion post. So September 3rd, 1895 is the date when supposedly the first professional American football game was played. And before the game began, there was massive festivities. Dave Barry knew how to hype up a crowd. So he got a local cornet band together, and they actually led... Oh, we got a Crystal water truck interrupting us. He actually had a cornet band lead both Latrobe and Jeannette's teams down Ligonier Street here to the YMCA fields. We're very fortunate that Dave Barry's newspaper, the Latrobe Clipper, actually has a pretty detailed, albeit highly biased account of the game that day. Little Brallier kicked the ball far down in the southwest corner of the field, where it was advanced only a few yards. After a few futile attempts to break through our line, Latrobe got possession of the ball on a fumble, and after a few small gains around the ends, bucking the line was resorted to, with much success, for after a few rushes through their tackles, the ball was forced over the line for a touchdown, just 7 minutes after play began. The ball was then brought out to the 15-yard line, and Little Brallier kicked the goal beautifully, making the score 6-0 in favor of Latrobe. It was here that Latrobe showed her superior strength over Jeannette, by plowing through their lines for gains, they being utterly unable to stop the terrific rushes of our boys. This was continued until the ball was on the 50-yard line, when the signal was given for the ball to be carried around the end. Little Brallier again kicked the ball squarely between the goalposts, making the score 12-0 in favor of Latrobe. The crowd was now wild, and maroon and orange was waving everywhere. Men, women, and children were yelling frantically, and football was surely endeared into the hearts of the people of Latrobe. The ball was played up and down the field, principally on Jeannette's territory, and it became evident to the spectators that Latrobe could have run up the score to higher figures. But they were simply playing to keep Jeannette from scoring, and after playing back and forward, the ball changing hands several times without any especially interesting features, until the last minute of the game, when Crookston of Jeannette took the ball around Latrobe's left end for a 20-yard run, where he was tackled by Howard. Time was called. Score, Latrobe 12, Jeannette 0, touchdowns, Aukerman 2, goals kicked, Brallier 2. The 1895 season for the Latrobe Athletic Association was very successful, winning 8 games but losing 4. Most notably, they suffered a 0-25 loss to the Greensburg Football Club, and that would birth an intense rivalry that would happen for several more years in this growing Western Pennsylvania football circuit. In 1896, John Brallier would continue to play for Latrobe when he was available. He only was able to play whenever he wasn't in college and playing football for whatever college he was associated with at the time. Brallier bounced around between various universities as he pursued a career in dentistry. And by 1897, boy, all these teams in the Western Pennsylvania circuit were really starting to beef up their rosters. And in 1897, both Latrobe and Greensburg claimed to have fielded the first all-pro football team. And what we mean is that every player on these clubs are reportedly being paid by the club. Mr. Barry, of course, claiming he had the first pro football team. And at Greensburg, they were doing some shady business. Were they really paying all those players? I don't know. I was paying all of them. You can trust me, I'm Mr. Barry. By 1898, David Barry saw an opportunity in making a career out of American football. It wouldn't necessarily just have to be these athletic clubs having a gentlemanly game to get some good exercise. This could become a professional career for somebody. Not just the players he's paying, but also for the managers. And in 1898, there was a little thing going on called the Spanish-American War. A lot of these guys are playing football regularly. They got sworn into service for the United States Army, but a lot of them never actually got to see combat because the war ended before they could even get sent overseas. So a lot of these teams had to quickly adapt to a wartime situation, and then they had to bring in all their old players again, had these massive surpluses. And Mr. Barry came up with the idea of, hey, we have all these players signed. Why don't we have an all-star game? Let's get the best players from all of our teams. We'll put them on 2 sides of the field. It'll be great. Everybody's going to come see their favorite stars. It's going to be awesome. Now, there was a West Pennsylvania all-star game held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1898. It wasn't as successful as Mr. Barry had hoped. His Western Pennsylvania all-star team, which really was just the Latrobe team because none of the rivals like Greensburg wanted to give their players to Mr. Barry, lost 0-16 against the Duquesne Country and Athletic Club. Also, low attendance because it was in the middle of the end of the baseball season. Everybody wanted to go see the baseball games. The weather, I've heard, wasn't too good that day of the game. There were contract disputes before the game. I've even heard about one of the players holding Mr. Barry hostage until he paid him the money he had supposedly promised him for this all-star game. It was a mess. But it is considered the first time you ever had a professional football all-star game. Now, by the early 1900s, David Barry doesn't seem to be really involved with the Latrobe Athletic Association. That doesn't mean they were doing bad. They were doing quite a number on other teams on the gridiron at this point. And it seems by 1902 that John Brallier had ended up becoming the player coach of the team. And even some sources say he was now the manager of the Latrobe Athletic Association. So what is David Barry up to? Well, he's been called in by, of all things, baseball club owners in Philadelphia to handle their own dispute. See, the 2 baseball teams that were in Philadelphia at the time, both of their club owners tried to make their own football team to kind of one-up each other. And, well, now they both have football teams. What are we going to do about it? Well, they brought in David Barry, who's like, hey, I can get all these all-star players from the Pittsburgh area, and we can get a few other clubs together. And, you know, my players are the best players in the world. And by the world, I mean Southwestern Pennsylvania. We could have a national football league. Yeah, that's right. David J. Barry helped to create the first National Football League. And the reason it's the first and not the is because the 1902 National Football League season was literally 3 Pennsylvania teams playing a short tournament. And at the end of it, every team claimed victory. And since David Barry was the manager of the National Football League, he claimed the Pittsburgh Stars were the champions. Also, the Pittsburgh Stars were also the team he was managing. So he was managing a team and he was managing the whole league. Idea man. Great ideas. So if you haven't noticed right now that these early professional football seasons, at least those being held in the Western Pennsylvania circuit, they didn't really have championship games. There were no playoffs yet. The idea was whoever had the most points at the end of a season would be the winner of the season. They would be the champion. That could come under a lot of controversy, however, because then people say, that score wasn't right. Well, actually, it was that touchdown was worth this many points, and that field goal is worth that many points. So you'll see a lot of politicking depending on who was in charge, who had the most dominant team in the Western Pennsylvania circuit. Between 1903 and 1905, the Latrobe Athletic Association were undefeated and claimed the championship for the Western Pennsylvania circuit. Keyword, they claimed it. There was no final game to decide it. And who was going to dispute John Brallier and his Latrobe Athletic Association? These were the guys that started pro football in the eyes of many, and they were some of the toughest players on the field at this point. If you look at some of these records, you have some very long seasons, and then you have some that only last 3 or 4 games because everybody else quit. So I mentioned earlier in the video around 1900, 1901, Latrobe Steel expanded, and that meant completely covering the YMCA field where their early football games had been played. So they didn't have to move too far. The Latrobe Athletic Association just moved right across Ligonier Street to another open field and played several more seasons over here. Actually, between 1903 and 1905, when they won they claim to have won 3 championships. Those championship seasons would have been held in this athletic field. And actually, up until a few years ago, this was a sports field of some type. If you go on Google Maps, it'll say Old Athletic Field right here. But only a few years ago, that was covered over by a new school building. There's a fun little piece of retracing history. Yeah, wrap your head around that one. So this is where the old athletic field was in the later years of the Latrobe Athletic Association's existence. And well, there's a biking trail today here right on its boundary. This was once the right-of-way of the Ligonier Valley Railroad, which we covered in the very first episode of Retracing History. So yeah, it's kind of come full circle. So that's where some say the first pro football game was played. And this was where we covered the very first episode of Retracing History about the Ligonier Valley Railroad. Small world. Now, this next part of our episode really has nothing to do with the Latrobe Athletic Association, but we're talking about football, and during my research of early American football, I found that we must talk about that dude over there. 1905 is a very important year for American football. Not just because the Latrobe Athletic Association claimed their 3rd championship, but also 1905 was a year that American football almost died. Because of the casualty rate that the sport had procured over the years, a lot of colleges were being pressured to shut down their football organizations. And in the fall of 1905, President Roosevelt called some of these football club leaders together to say, hey, I don't want my favorite sport to die. Can you guys think of a solution to the problems? And they went, well, we really can't change the rules because Walter Camp, who wrote the rule book, he doesn't want us to really do anything like passing the ball. He wants it to be on the ground, wants it to be close quarters combat. So President Roosevelt decided, this forward pass idea, it would save lives. He went to the U.S. Naval Academy and he pressured one of the officials who was up for promotion and pressured him to start considering using the forward pass, recognizing it as a legal play in the games being held at the U.S. Naval Academy. You know, your Navy and Army football games that are now historic and legendary today. And really through that, President Roosevelt was able to influence the rule book of American football, get the forward pass approved as a legal activity. And that was seen as a way to lessen the need to bash each other's brains in on the line of scrimmage. Don't get me wrong, there was still, even to this day, of course, there's plenty of injuries, and unfortunately there still were a few more fatalities, but after this influence President Roosevelt used to get the forward pass legalized and accepted by many colleges across the United States, definitely changed how American football was played. It was no longer just a simple running game, it was now a throwing game to see who can throw the football the farthest. That being said, the Roosevelt influence that popularized American football would not reach Latrobe, Pennsylvania, as by the late 1900s, most people were no longer interested in the football club. Maybe it's because everybody was too bruised to keep playing and nobody wanted to get into this ghastly game. And hey, you know, funny enough, the game with the bat is less dangerous. How is this possible? In any case, it seems by all records that the Latrobe Athletic Association ceased playing professional football at the end of 1909. Professional American football left Latrobe, Pennsylvania behind, but grew exponentially. And in 1920, a new National Football League was formed. This one was actually successful. Look, David J. Barry had the idea, but he didn't have all the pieces. And this new NFL would grow across the country, become one of the leading sport leagues in the US of A. And in the 1940s, they were beginning to recognize their roots and came to recognize John Brallier, the quarterback for the Latrobe Athletic Association, as the first pro-American football player. However, there would be some controversy to that. But first, Brallier is recognized as the first pro football player, and since he played his first pro game in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, there were talks that the Professional Football Hall of Fame should go in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And talks got quite deep. In the 1960s, however, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which was not open in Latrobe, was open in Canton, Ohio, did some research and discovered John Brallier was not the first pro football player. In fact, at close, he is the 7th professional football player. You see, there had been a very tense rivalry between two athletic organizations in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This would be between the Allegheny Athletic Association and the Pittsburgh Athletic Club. And I believe this rivalry went beyond American football, but for the sake of it, these two wanted to have one big battle to settle it all, who was the superior football club in Pittsburgh. And well, to do this, they used some shady tactics, at least for 19th century football shady. They were behind the scenes outbidding each other to get these big name players from colleges to come in to play this one-off game to settle this dispute. One of the players ended up taking the bait was William Pudge Heffelfinger. Now the AAA and the PAC went back and forth to get Heffelfinger, who was a renowned guard from Yale University, to get him to play for their club. The final bid was for over $500 from the AAA. Heffelfinger accepted the offer and came to Pittsburgh to play this one-off game November 12, 1892. And boy, did it not go well. When Heffelfinger showed up in Exposition Park, which was in then Allegheny City, Pennsylvania, the crowd was outraged. How dare the AAA use all this money to leverage that they'll win this game? The PAC was outraged. They're arguing with each other. The players are fighting on the field. The crowds are fighting. Eventually, the official had to say this game is an exhibition game. This has no merit on the rivalry between these two teams. This is a one-off. The score won't matter, which infuriated the people that had betted on this game because they thought this was for all the marbles. It just was a mess. This game ended up only going to a score of 4-0, with Heffelfinger scoring the only touchdown. He took us $500. What? You Yinzers are all crazy, and I'm getting out of here. However, for as ugly as this game was, this is the earliest recorded time that an American football player was paid to play the sport, meaning the first American football game was played not on September 3rd, 1895 in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. It was played on November 12, 1892 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Well, technically it was Allegheny City then. We absorbed a lot of different communities to make the big thing you know as the Burgh. It's a whole other story for another day. Now, I understand there's much controversy over declaring the September 3rd, 1895 game between Latrobe and Jeannette as the first American pro football game. That being said, I'm surprised there's no marker out here, which is why I keep saying this is the information I'm working off of from the Latrobe Historical Society and just kind of overlay in different maps. This seems to be where the YMCA field was. There is rumored to be a small marker, not here, but at the current high school football stadium for Latrobe. We'll peek over there. I'm going to see if I can find that marker. Believe it or not, it's not on a historical marker database, so that got me a little worried. All right, we've moved less than a mile from where the old YMCA field was likely located. We've moved to the Latrobe Memorial Stadium. This is the current stadium used by the Latrobe School District and for a lot of other municipal activities. It's very large. At least, look, I come from a rural town. Our high school football field is one set of bleachers, and the actual field sits next to a floodplain. So, you know, this is much more grandiose in my eyes. So it didn't take long. I was a little worried I wasn't going to find what I was looking for, but here it is. So here we have the lone marker dedicated to celebrating Latrobe as one of the birthplaces of professional football. On September 3rd, 1895, 300 yards southeast of this spot, John Brallier, quarterback, was paid $10 in expenses for leading the Latrobe YMCA team to a 6-0 win over Jeannette. That is actually incorrect. It was a 12-0 victory over Jeannette. This payment is recognized by the National Football League as the beginning of the professional gridiron sport. Included on the roster of subsequent Latrobe professional teams were the following football greats. And we have several there. George Aukerman at one point, actually, I believe was coach or team captain later years. George Flickinger, Deacon Brandt, Jack Gass, Alex Lard, Charles McDyer, Walter Okenso, Harry Ryan. Harry Ryan also at one point was a coach or a captain for the team. Marcus Saxon was actually a son of Mr. Saxon, who had big coal rights in southwestern Pennsylvania. Charles Shoemaker, John Schmidt, Doggy, Trenchard. That's the gentleman who Mr. Barry and the Greensburg team were in a bidding war over. He ended up getting paid $75 per game. Eddie Wood, Field and Yost, and very interestingly, Ed Abbaticcio. I'm not good at Italian. I'm not good at any language. Let's be honest, guys. I'm a Yinzer. I can't even speak English. Ed Abbaticcio, he's on here. Those that are sports historians, sports history buffs, you may be confused why he's on a football placard, because Ed Abbaticcio is known as being the first Italian player in Major League Baseball, or at least having Italian ancestry predominantly. He actually played for the 1909 Pittsburgh Pirates. That year they did win the World Series. He also played for the Phillies, played for a few other organizations. But he is from Latrobe. And yes, he actually played for the Latrobe Athletic Association for football when, he wasn't playing baseball. So it's kind of showing you still at this time, baseball was America's pastime, not American football yet. But yes, he did play on the historic Latrobe Athletics Association. And he actually is buried here in Latrobe, Pennsylvania today. So very interesting plaque here. All right, that's going to wrap up this edition of Retracing History. Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Is it the birthplace of American pro football? No. If you're talking about the first American pro football game, no, that was not hosted on September 3rd, 1895, as we've disproven in this video. But that being said, people like John Brallier and Dave Barry, they all greatly contributed into creating American pro football, the sport that we all know it today. I would argue, even though the first pro game wasn't hosted in Latrobe, I would argue Latrobe has had a very prominent impact on the sport today, more so than other towns can claim to have. Think about it. Dave Barry, he had one of the first all-pro teams. He created the All-Star game, at least in American football. He even made the first NFL. So yeah, one of long lay and pioneering ideas we take for granted today, and not just American football, but most sports in North America. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button down below. And if you want to follow us in our future adventures, subscribe here to the channel to Redoubt Productions. And if you want to go the extra mile supporting us, keeping us on the road and keeping me caffeinated, you can go to our Ko-fi page, links in the description below. You can buy me a cup of coffee, it's a small donation, or you can join the membership program, which we call The Garrison. For a small monthly fee, you'll get access to behind the scenes footage, select scripts. We try to give you early access to some videos, and I'm always trying to develop new bonuses with each passing year. Well, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.